Imagine an animal born already armored. Its quills harden hours after birth. This defense system of the porcupine keeps threats away in order to survive, and yet its own barbs can injure itself. In the human world, defensiveness is a survival adaptation that becomes a prison over time. From my observations, this survival imprint is the one that brings the greatest amount of destruction and disconnection in relationships. It's also what most sabotages the self-healing process. Self-defense can be important. Sometimes we have to fight to save our lives, which is why we have biological defense mechanisms encoded into the nervous system. But when the defense mode becomes a chronic condition, it turns into defensiveness. This happens when we've been in long-term situations and relationships where there was a chronic sense of danger or life threat. We developed the armor of self-protection in order to feel safe and keep surviving our circumstances. Defensiveness was a survival intelligence that once kept you alive. When it embeds itself in your ego's story of who you are and what is reality, it keeps you disconnected and captive to the past. Defensiveness is a protective strategy that eventually outlives its usefulness and stops us from thriving. The automatic posture of protection against perceived threats includes vulnerability, intimacy, or truth, because once upon a time, those experiences led to harm or pain. The armor that once protected the tender inner being over time becomes so hardened that it keeps everything out. When we live in that state chronically, we lose access to tenderness, curiosity, compassion, nuance, connection, healing, insights, intuition, creativity, and true safety. We forget how to flow in life with ease and grace. In this episode, we're going to explore the possibility of laying down the armor of defensiveness. Often, we think we're defending ourselves from others, but usually, we're defending ourselves against feeling what was once too much. Our defensive stance didn't originate in our life, though it was imprinted since childhood and reinforced through life experience. We inherited defensiveness from cultural and religious conditioning, wars, invasions, and the ancestral hypervigilance of those who came before us. This episode is the second portal in this 9-part mini-series on the emotional and behavioral anchors that weigh us down in life. We're going to explore defensiveness through the lens of, where did I learn that being vulnerable meant annihilation? Where am I protecting an old wound instead of letting it heal? Welcome to Inner Integration. I'm Meredith Miller, and this is Defensiveness, the armor we mistake for safety. The biological state of defense and defensiveness. Self-defense saves lives. It has a survival purpose, but when it becomes a chronic state, it calcifies into a posture that closes the heart and compresses the field. As mammals, we require social connection for homeostasis and well-being. Dr. Stephen Porges, the creator of the polyvagal theory, says that connection is a biological imperative for humans, mammals. Dr. Porges differentiates between a state of defense, which is a primal state, and a state of attachment, which is connection. A biological defense state involves fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. He emphasizes that the nervous system is binary, which means it's either one state or the other, but not in both at the same time. So when we're defensive, we aren't connecting, even when we're interacting with one another. The nervous system doesn't read that as connection. It reads the interaction as a danger or threat. Defensiveness, in terms of the armor I'm speaking of in this episode, is predominantly about fight, and I'm referring to a chronic state, like when the toggle switch for fight mode gets stuck on. It's when the defense state becomes a posture of guardedness. Why does that happen? Neuroscientist Dr. Andrew Huberman speaks of the science behind all the terrible things that happens to humans, mammals, after a period of forced prolonged isolation. In his podcast, he particularly named the increase in irritability and aggression that takes place. This is why people are more defensive now than ever in the post-pandemic world. The prolonged social distancing campaign, combined with the sense of danger and life threat, whether the fear bombardment or the tyranny, created a prolonged period of forced isolation in a species whose well-being and homeostasis depend on being able to connect in order to feel safe and social, as Dr. Porges refers to the state of connection. But the trend of disconnection and defensiveness didn't start there. It was growing over time as the digital age became entangled with nearly every aspect of our life. The more we were conditioned to turn toward devices and away from one another, the more isolated and defensive we became. Of course, difficult child experiences might condition us to perceive the world as hostile and dangerous. Defensiveness as a fight response often becomes our primary form of self-protection in adolescence. Some people act it out toward others, and some people act it inward through self-hatred and beating ourselves up. It could also be a mix of both. And all of the above is layered on top of generations of unresolved trauma that we inherited, which causes distortions and disruptions in connection. Each generation feels heavier and more isolated than the last because the burden keeps growing. This is why people are struggling to connect now. It's not our fault, but we can change it. The nature of defensiveness means we become our own worst enemy. Our inner wars are reflected in our relationships in the world. But the challenge is that part of the defensiveness is the armoring that protects us from even recognizing the defensiveness. Maybe we really want to heal and connect, but we can't seem to get out of our own way because we aren't aware that we're defensive. When the armor of guardedness dissolves. For most of my life, I was defensive. I couldn't admit when I was hurt because I didn't want anyone to know they had that power over me. So I armored up in pride. If someone pulled away, I'd pull away one step further. I'd act tough like it didn't bother me. I masked the pain of disconnection behind toughness or indifference. When I finally did address what was bothering me, it came out with anger, not sadness. And anger is a repellent. It keeps people at a distance because they don't feel safe to come close. Anger is also a cover story. It's valid, but it's the protective emotion guarding the more vulnerable emotions underneath. That's where the real story is. Defensiveness blocks us from accessing those deeper emotions in order to free the energy locked up there. Defensiveness is the porcupine's quills. It says, "Don't come closer." Usually not because we don't want closeness, but because closeness feels like danger when vulnerability hasn't yet become safe. One of the genetic programs I carried was, I have to be guarded to be safe. It was woven into the story of my ancestors in the Caucasus Mountains, who I mentioned in episode 5. And when that program began to dissolve, so did the defenses I didn't even realize I was still wearing as armor. My dog has always known her boundary, the perimeter of a blanket at the foot of the bed, and she's supposed to stay on her side of the bed so I can stretch my long legs out comfortably. For her whole life, I saw this dynamic with my dog through the lens of defensiveness. The first several years, she stayed far to that side, but in recent years, she'd start out on her side of the bed and inevitably work her way over, ending up entangled in my legs. I always thought she was trying to take my space. But a little over a year ago, one night, after releasing the ancestral program, I have to be guarded to be safe, suddenly something shifted. The old defensiveness dissolved. The lens was cleaned, and I could see with new clarity. She moved over to my side of the bed and squished her way between my calves. I looked down at her, snuggled up against my legs, and bursted into tears. Because I finally saw the truth. She wasn't invading my space. She just wanted to be close to me. And I realize that may sound obvious from the outside, but I'm sharing this because when we're living under the armor of defensiveness, we can only see through that lens. We can't see what's really happening without all the distortions. Our defensiveness blocks us from experiencing the safety of the closeness that we truly crave. And when our quills get stuck in the raised position, we see everything through the lens of invasion and threat. Guardedness becomes so comfortable, we normalize it. My dog's intention was always the same. It was my perspective that shifted. And dogs are so unconditionally loving that she never stopped trying to be close to me, no matter how much I pushed her away. Connection and all of the beauty of the human experience is on the other side of the guardedness. Defensiveness affects our lives and relationships. Maybe you're starting to catch glimpses of your own defensiveness patterns. It's challenging to see it from inside the armor, especially since it's probably always been there to some degree. Here are some ways we learn to be defensive. Childhood experiences left us feeling helpless. Familial, religious, and/or cultural dogma taught us that vulnerability is weakness. The boundary of no wasn't allowed or honored. We had to fight to survive because no one was looking after us. Trust was damaged by betrayal, abuse, neglect, violence, or abandonment. We inherited the generational hypervigilance of danger due to experiences our ancestors had and couldn't resolve. Remembering that defensiveness is a trauma adaptation, let's look at the results of defensiveness without moralizing or judging these behaviors. Let's contemplate from a place of curiosity and compassion. Here are some ways that defensiveness shows up in life and relationships. A chronic sense of hardship, unfairness, or scarcity. Feeling like the outsider or outcast. Persistent loneliness. A mean inner critic and harshness towards self. Perception that's filtered to only see danger, attack, or opposition. A chronic desire to fight, plus exhaustion from fighting. Driving others away because they're exhausted from fighting. Emotional hardening and difficulty letting love in. Lashing out at others when triggered or beating oneself up. A fear of accepting help or support. A resistance to feedback, making healing and relational pair difficult due to the projection of the shadow instead of accountability. Confusion and catastrophizing about other people's intentions. Pushing away help for growth and healing. The need to be angry in order to say no, then expressing boundaries with anger instead of assertion. Being walled up instead of having healthy boundaries. Having a know-it-all attitude, rigid thinking, and you have to be right all the time. Living in victimhood or survival instead of thriving. A deep inner conflict between what we really want and the part of us that wants to be right about why we can't have it. Escalating conflict in interpersonal relationships. Irritability, anger, resentment, grudges, hatred. Dramatic and volatile relationships, friendships, work situations. Challenges with self-honesty and pride, making it difficult to see ourselves in our patterns, which keeps us stuck and unable to move forward in the healing process. Feeling like you can't count on anyone, you have to do it all alone. People are dangerous, the world is hostile, and what you say doesn't matter. A resistance to surrender and softening by associating it with defeat or weakness. Blocked connection with self, others, and the creator of all that is. Being caught in ancestral loops of survival, but preventing lineage evolution. You may have a beautiful heart and a lot of love to share, but if your heart is surrounded by barbed wire, that keeps everyone out. It can hurt those who try to come near, even though that isn't your intention. Remember, hypervigilance is a trauma response. It served a purpose. It was meant to keep you safe from the same thing happening again. And that could include the ancestral stories and loops that we're repeating without knowing. But over time, chronic hypervigilance turns into the armoring of defensiveness. And that keeps you stuck in the past without being able to create a new future. So I invite you to gently ask yourself, is the guardedness still needed? Maybe you want to dissolve the armor, but you're wondering what's a new way of protecting yourself without the armor. Would you like to know that it's possible to cultivate inner safety, free from the old guardedness, hardness, harshness, and defensiveness? The evolution of protection. So if we aren't guarded all the time, how do we protect ourselves? This is one of the most common questions I hear from people, especially in recent years. Defensiveness is a reaction to perceived threat. Embodied sovereignty is a state of coherence that doesn't require guardedness. Instead, it sets the frequency and decides what comes close. Defensiveness is a reaction, an automatic reflex rooted in old wounds. It comes from the part of us still bracing for what already happened. It assumes danger even when there isn't any. It's unconscious and emotionally charged. Embodied sovereignty is a conscious response that comes from a state of coherence. It's the knowing that radiates through your field. I'm safe within myself. Not because nothing difficult will ever happen again, not because our world is any safer, but because you trust yourself to meet life with presence and response, rather than protection and retreat. Defensiveness guards like armor. It's thick, rigid, hard, and often isolating. Embodied sovereignty is a boundary. It's clear, breathable, and relational. Defensiveness contracts the field because it's fueled by fear of harm. Embodied sovereignty opens the field with discernment because it arises from a sense of inner worth and clarity of values. Defensiveness is darkness. Embodied sovereignty is light. Defensiveness shuts down vulnerability. Embodied sovereignty honors vulnerability while choosing when, where, with whom, and how to share it. Defensiveness is the ego's strategy to avoid pain. Embodied sovereignty is the higher self's discernment to preserve coherence, wholeness, and connection. The ego says, I must guard myself to survive. The higher self says, I can be present and safe without shutting down. In a world full of noise, fear, manipulation, existential threats, and weaponized information, cultivating embodied sovereignty helps you stay anchored, so you're not swept away by every emotional wave or external threat narrative. So it's not about disconnecting from reality or bypassing it. It's about strengthening your resonance so that you can move through life with clarity, breath, and grace. And because of how defensiveness is defensive about its defensiveness, here's a quick vibe check. If the default is to attack the messenger, you're operating from armor. Discernment pauses to reflect. What's true here? And what's old fear resonating in my body? Here's some tips for thriving amid chaos without defaulting to defensiveness. Tune inward before reacting. Ask, is this a real threat or a familiar fear? Take a breath. Regulate the nervous system before making decisions or engaging in communication. Discern information and energy. Don't absorb it all. It's okay to turn away from the noise to protect your field. Practice sovereignty. Remember, you can choose what you engage with and how. Lean into spiritual connection. Let the creator, not the chaos, be your anchor. Let the light, not the darkness, be your protection. Let your body be your compass. If something makes you anxious, tightened, closed, pause. If it brings clarity and peace, it may be more aligned. That includes your thoughts. Return to presence. Clarity isn't found in the mind exactly. It emerges from the stillness, the breath, and the quiet awareness. When we soften our defenses, we're not abandoning safety, we're evolving it. We're upgrading from armoring to awareness, from rigid protection to radiant presence. This is how we stop defending old wounds and start allowing new truths to live through us. What you'll notice is that you're actually more situationally aware in the present, with the inner resources to respond to what's not okay for you when you're no longer reacting to the past. Otherwise, you'll either have a hyper-reactive reaction or a delayed reaction. That's when you know you're replaying the past. As the ego's rigidity softens and trust is rebuilt internally and spiritually, the armoring begins to dissolve. The higher self starts to take the lead. We no longer need to fight reality in order to feel safe. We can meet it with presence, discernment, and conscious response rather than reflex. That becomes a foundation of relational trust and harmony. The lineage of defensiveness. Defensiveness is often seen as a personality trait, but much of what we identify as ours is actually inherited and programmed. Energetic, emotional, and behavioral patterns passed down through our family lines and reinforced through our life experiences. These aren't just stories or traumas. They're also agreements, atmospheres, imprints, survival architecture encoded into our nervous systems and field before we had language. When we're caught in defensive reactivity, we're often trapped in ancestral loops, repeating patterns that were never ours to begin with. They were imprinted by generations who didn't have the time, tools, or safety to process what happened to them because they just had to survive. We have the luxury of greater awareness and knowledge now because there's so much more information available, and human consciousness is under existential pressure to evolve during this convergence point in history. However, we can know a lot more, yet still be stuck in the same old loops and patterns. In fact, that's often where defensiveness doubles down under self-righteousness, pride, and projection. This isn't about blaming, shaming, and judging yourself for those patterns. It's very common, and there's nothing wrong with you. But also, it's not a fun existence living in defensiveness. Speaking from experience. So if you want to start to thrive, the key is converting the awareness and knowledge into consciousness and wisdom. This is where the walls around the heart can begin to soften because they're no longer needed. When you realize that your self-protection isn't proof of brokenness, but a continuation of stuck survival adaptations, something shifts. You begin to see nothing is wrong with me. I'm simply carrying something that never had space to complete itself. Many of our ancestors had to suppress their voices, harden their hearts, and keep their heads down to survive. They learned that vulnerability meant death, emotionally, socially, or literally. Trust was shattered through wars and abuse. Betrayal left scars that hardened into suspicion and control, even hatred. Emotional expression was punished or pathologized. Tenderness was unsafe. These messages didn't stay in their bodies and simply return to the earth with the flesh. They were energetically encoded into the field, the morphic memory of the lineage, and passed on as the silent inheritance. So if you ever felt confused by your own reactivity or pain around being hurt and guarded, pause and ask, who in my lineage had to stay armored to survive? And what are you still carrying for them? Would you like to know that you can keep the wisdom of discernment, but release the fear that hardens the heart? And would you like to let your ancestors know we no longer have to carry this? We can make a new agreement together. This work isn't about assigning blame, it's about transformation and coherence. It begins with recognition, seeing what's truly yours, what was inherited, and what can now be released because it's no longer serving you. Once we see it's not ours, we stop defending it. We can begin to liberate ourselves and the lineage. So here's the biggest secret I learned about defensiveness. The most powerful way to reclaim your true strength is to stop mistaking defensiveness for empowerment and instead meet the pain you've been guarding with compassion and curiosity. Defensiveness keeps you disconnected. Compassion and curiosity open the door to clarity. I want to invite you to take a moment now to come into the body, to explore the somatic practice if you'd like to soften the armor. Place one hand on your heart and the other on your solar plexus, just above the navel and below the sternum. Close your eyes if you can, and only do this if you're in a safe place, you're at home, you're not driving. Go ahead and take a slow, deep breath in through the nose and out through the mouth, breathing naturally and coming back to the breath anytime you notice it stops. Can you recall a moment, a situation, an experience that's still bothering you? A time when you felt agitated, angry, or powerless? What was the story you were telling yourself about what happened? Just noticing it with curiosity and compassion, without judgment or entangling with it. Now, let's be curious about childhood conditioning. Who do you become when you have to be right? Is this a genetic program from your mom's lineage or your dad's, or both in different ways? And now, if you'd like to go another layer deeper, when did you first learn that vulnerability was weakness or dangerous? Remember to keep breathing. Notice where in your body you might feel tightness, tension, agitation, or guarding. You're not trying to change it, just witnessing, gently, with curiosity. Now, if you're ready, you can ask yourself softly, what might this part be protecting me from feeling? Just let the answer rise, not from the mind and from thinking, but from the body's subtle language. Maybe a feeling, a word, a sensation, a memory flash, or a sudden knowing. Breathing gently and deeply into that place, just creating space for it. It can be helpful to identify the benefit of holding on to it. How is it still serving me to maintain the armoring of self-protection? And if you'd like to, you can invite yourself into a new frequency. What would it feel like to practice just one softer, more curious, and more compassionate response next time I'm triggered? Keep breathing through any discomfort and feel the support of the ground beneath you. Maybe you can let the armor begin to melt a little not because you should, but because you can. Notice what that feels like. Witness what it's like to be here, perhaps a little more present with yourself than before. What's it like to be a little more free to feel what was once too much to carry before? That is the start of something. Vulnerability, as well as the tenderness and sensitivity that emerges from it, may be scary at first when we're used to taking shelter under rigid guardedness. It feels weird to walk around without that armor anymore, but it also feels incredibly light and expansive. Tenderness, held in a container of embodied sovereignty, is incredibly valuable in a world that's lost its sensitivity. Would you like to know that you can have tenderness, as well as your ability to defend yourself and protect yourself in the face of an actual life threat when you actually need to fight? And would you like to know that you can soften the armor and know when it's time to be a warrior? And would you like to forgive yourself for the times in which you couldn't protect yourself, you didn't know how to, or you chose not to because you were programmed to do that? And would you also like to forgive yourself for any time when you were defensive, when you pushed people away, when you argued, when you fought, when you created conflict? Would you like to know that you're free to make new choices now? And would you like to know that you couldn't have made any other decision at the time because you were programmed and conditioned to react that way? And would you like to remember that you can come back to your breath anytime you want to slow things down and make a new choice from your embodied sovereignty instead of the old distortions and defensiveness? Coming up next in this series, fear is the phantom of control. As the armor of defensiveness begins to soften, our next exploration is fear. The fear of losing control. The fear of being too much or not enough. The fear of what might happen if we finally let go. In the next episode, we'll explore how fear disguises itself as control over self, others, time, and reality, and how it robs us of presence, trust, ease, flow, and connection. We'll dig into the roots of inherited fear, how it's wired into our nervous systems for biological survival, yet when it becomes a chronic state, it collapses our energy and dims our light. We'll explore how we can begin to unhook from fear's distortions and illusions so we can liberate our essence and light. If this message speaks to your soul, make sure to subscribe or follow wherever you listen to podcasts. Share this with someone else on the path, someone who's ready to go deeper, beyond the surface of healing and into true integration, beyond the personal and into the ancestral, collective, and planetary layers too. And if you'd like to leave a message or a note for me, something that resonated, something you want to hear more about, you can leave a comment here, or you'll find a link in the show notes where you can send me a private message. If you'd like to work privately with me, you'll find the link for one-on-ones in the show notes or on my website, innerintegration.com. I'd love to help you connect with these themes in your own life so you can transmute them for yourself and your own lineage, creating a positive impact in your life and the world around you. I also have an epic 3-month transformational journey called Becoming You for those who want a guide to walk with you into your own inner alchemy of wounds into wisdom, embodying your purpose and leading with light. Remember, keep listening within. No more playing small. It's time to remember who you are. The world needs your wholeness now more than ever. You are not the wound. You are the medicine. Let your trauma become your map to purpose. Thank you for joining me today for this transmission of the Inner Integration Podcast. You're not broken. You're not behind. Your trauma wasn't a detour. It was initiation, an immersion into the very wisdom your soul came here to embody. To go deeper into this work, visit innerintegration.com. And until next time, big hug to you.